provoking conversations about how to best drive collective action toward a more just and inclusive future. This third and final day of Uniting Business Live gives us an opportunity to reflect on the role of business in accelerating progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDG Business Forum, co-hosted by the International Chamber of Commerce, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the UN Global Compact, is one of the largest and most significant UN-convened events for the private sector. Although traveling to the UN headquarters in New York is impossible right now, we are thrilled to have you here on our interactive event platform. And I encourage you to take a look and to use its many features, including the event chat, which is located on the right side of your screen, where you can say hello to the other attendees and introduce yourselves. That's where you can send private messages and even invite them for a video chat. The networking section is in the navigation bar on the left side of your screen, and it enables you to also message and video chat with other attendees. You can even swap contact information. Give it a try, and you might make some new friends. You can also follow the day on social media by using the hashtags SDGBiz and Uniting Business. Here on the platform, there is also a pavilion area that you should definitely visit. Our 15 sponsors will be showcasing their sustainability work and hosting their own live sessions. Now, let's get down to business, SDG business. We have a fantastic program for you today, featuring 2 heads of state, 22 representatives from international organizations, and more than 40 senior business leaders. This year's SDG Business Forum marks the start of the decade of action and delivery on the Sustainable Development Goals. But 2020 has also presented a new set of unforeseen global challenges. The health and economic costs of the COVID-19 pandemic have been exacerbated in many countries by the climate crisis and inequality. The role of business in addressing these issues is fundamentally shifting. Now, to open this year's SDG Business Forum, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the United Nations Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Ladies and gentlemen, business leaders, friends, it is a pleasure to greet you today for the SDG Business Forum. I'm encouraged that so many companies are represented this year with a diversity of sizes, sectors and regions, because we need unity and international cooperation now more than ever. The business of sustainable development is a crucial issue, and we are addressing it at a crucial moment. This is indeed a moment of crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has given rise to the most serious social and economic upheaval since the United Nations was created 75 years ago. It has exposed our global fragility, which extends far beyond health systems. Fragility affects all our global institutions and multilateral efforts. We see it in our inadequate response to the climate crisis, in the weakness of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, and the lawlessness of cyberspace. To tackle this fragility, we need unity and solidarity. Returning to old, discredited systems is out of the question. The pandemic is a tragedy, but it has also created a moment of possibility. Governments and the private sector have already changed their working methods more quickly than ever before. The previously unimaginable has suddenly become possible and even desirable. Everywhere we see new thinking, innovation and transformation. Governments and businesses must now work together to shift direction. That is the only way to weather the pandemic, build resilience for the future and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In our 75th anniversary year, the United Nations is not interested in business as usual. We need business unusual. Business that is stepping up and taking responsibility for today and tomorrow, assessing the long-term costs and benefits of its activities, working in partnership with civil society, young people, academia and more to create strong communities and resilient societies. Equality, inclusiveness and sustainability are no longer nice to have, optional extras to build a more caring brand. They are the indispensable keys to recovering from the pandemic and building healthy and prosperous economies and societies. I thank you all for your engagement and commitment. And I thank the International Chamber of Commerce, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs and the United Nations Global Compact for organizing this event and for uniting business in the service of a better world. I urge all of you to sign to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, if you have not yet done so. I hope your discussions today will lead to concrete steps towards the sustainable world we so urgently need. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, for those inspiring remarks. Since its inception 5 years ago, the SDG Business Forum has been the convening space for leaders who believe in transformational change for common good. With more than 11,000 participants from all sectors and from every region registered to attend the forum live today, I think it's fair to say that we are ready to accelerate the transition to business unusual. As a former banker and businessman, our next speaker is a standout example of a leader leveraging private sector experience and insights to shape the international agenda. Please welcome the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, His Excellency Gaston Browne.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Mr. President, Secretary General, distinguished guests, to include members of the international business community. Good morning. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, let us also recognize the decade of action. And that decade of action is upon us. With only 10 years left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we simply do not have any time to waste. The international community requires a full commitment to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they require it now more so than ever. As we celebrate the 5th anniversary of the historic adoption of the SDGs, there must be a recommitment by all to leave no one behind. Developing countries, especially African countries, small island developing states, and the least developed countries are dependent upon the full attainment of the SDGs. Our lived experience of COVID-19 is posing a serious challenge to reaching these goals by 2030. And urgent action to accelerate progress, in which we join hands together, is therefore needed. Excellencies, securing a globally accessible vaccine for COVID-19 should be one of the most shared, urgent endeavors of our lifetime. Until there is an equitable, immunized population in every country, the pandemic will continue to circulate, deepening the human and economic crisis and preventing us all from achieving the SDGs. Reaching vulnerable populations and communities with routine immunization and primary health care is one of the keys to leaving no one behind. No one is protected unless we collectively bring the COVID-19 pandemic under control. And restarting societies and economies hinges upon the cooperation of all. As leaders, we must recognize the gendered impacts of COVID-19. Gender responsive and transformative programming is key to building back better from COVID-19. Women and girls are disproportionately impacted by the immediate and long-term consequences of the coronavirus pandemic due to the disruptions in essential health services or their reprioritization. They hold less secure jobs, as we all know, in the informal sectors, and are bearing the brunt of unpaid care labor. And therefore, the SDG 5 must be given priority. We must also vigorously address the impact of climate change on the most vulnerable, and to eliminate global poverty, as well as guaranteeing the right to development for all countries. Our proposed united commitment in responding to COVID-19 must be done in concert with a commitment to a comprehensive global recovery strategy that will provide the necessary tools and financing to assist vulnerable countries. A rapid recovery also requires a shared responsibility with the private sector to deliver more resilient and inclusive societies that will be built back better. As the incoming chairman of the Alliance of Small Island States, let me take this opportunity, while I have the attention of the business leaders, to emphasize that small island states are appealing for greater engagement with the private sector in addressing the challenges of building back better and achieving the SDGs. Like Antigua and Barbuda, small island states in the Caribbean are facing not only solvency problems, but a liquidity problem brought about by the pandemic. Now, I call for urgent attention by the international financial institutions and the private sector to assist in the recovery from the pandemic and to develop bespoke and differentiated financial products based on the special circumstances of these countries. Now, unlike large states, states do not have the capacity of quantitative easing to bail out the economies, and therefore should be treated differently based on their vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities are well known. The Caribbean needs a private sector to join the international financial institutions to assist in the recovery by contributing to the special COVID-19 recovery fund, which was developed by the United Nations. And we appeal to everyone to contribute to that fund. The private sector also has an opportunity to get on board in the call for an alternative creative financial model, whether these are debt swaps as being promoted by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, or a special window for SIDS, or the moving forward of the idea of creating an independent public credit rating agency that will take into account the vulnerabilities of countries. Now, we owe it to future generations to work together and to build back better from COVID-19, and also to base our recovery from the pandemic on a solid foundation. So the Sustainable Development Goals are pivotal to this endeavor. Excellencies, we're all aware that the breadth of the SDGs aims to provide sustainable development for all, through us all. The achievement of the 17 global goals requires all hands on deck. We have a beautiful planet that has given us individual countries that are encased by stunning beaches, towering mountains, and astonishing glaciers. A planet that has accorded some of us with the luxuries of life, and where governments are obligated to take care of their citizens, and the private sector is admonished to do its part in building resilient societies. Both the public and private sectors have to work together in building resilient societies. No one entity has benefited from the planetary bounties than the private sector. Esteemed guests, business leaders, our world is becoming increasingly more complex and challenging. The health climate crisis are glaring examples. Economic instability and rising inequality, coupled with a growing population, should all concern us. These are daily issues that affect businesses, politics, and every one of us. And these will continue to have damaging effects on our ability to achieve the SDGs. I, however, take this opportunity to applaud the private sector, especially those who are already at the forefront of some of the call to action. And when governments renege on their commitment to climate change and the Paris Agreement, there are many in the private sector who would have issued their commitment and recommitment to fighting climate change. Now, as we fight against vaccine nationalism, the private sector is advocating for global vaccine distribution. And that is indeed commendable. And when democracy and the promotion of human rights hangs in the balance because of political maneuverings, Again, we have seen the private sector standing shoulder to shoulder with citizens. So we welcome the impact that the private sector is making in achieving the SDGs. And I want to take this opportunity to encourage you to continue making those pledges, knowing that there exists an even greater need for your assistance, especially during this period of the coronavirus pandemic. However, we should never forget that making an impact on this world is not achieved merely by the big efforts of the few, but rather by the sum of all the endeavors of many. So we appreciate every contribution, no matter how small. Having the obligation of a better world together with the urgency of today mean that the contribution of all businesses, especially in the developing world, is critical to our success, especially during this critical period of COVID-19. The SDGs are a means to an end and not an end in itself. This end can only be achieved with the collaboration of all, the private sector, governments, and civil society as a whole. We must all therefore contribute to a better world by 2030, a better world for ourselves, for others, and certainly for all generations to come. I thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. While this forum will explore sustainability strategy, ambition, and insights, we cannot forget that the success of every business is reliant on its employees, their families, and the broader community in which it operates. In this context, our opening plenary would not be complete without the global voice of the world's workers. It is my pleasure to welcome the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, SHARAN BURROW.
Thank you, Maggie. And can I say greetings to indeed John Denton and all the team, but all the members of the ICC. We very much valued the partnership that we've built during the last 9 or 10 months on a dialogue that existed before, but now one where we see that we are indeed very much shaping a future, and we must shape a future together. Even before COVID-19, you are all aware that we had a convergence of crisis that was undermining people and security, but also undermining the global economy. It was, of course, a crisis of inequality, historic levels, income, yes, but also race and gender. We saw an age of anger emerging because people were feeling despair and they couldn't trust that their future would be any better. And then, of course, we had the climate emergency. And if we don't deal with the climate emergency, then we won't have a sustainable planet on which we can grow decent work or indeed sustainable business. So these two areas were already hugely undermining our confidence and global demand. But then COVID-19 hit, and I'm not going to go through the impact, but 500 million jobs lost, 1.6 billion desperate people in informal work where if there's no money every day, there's no livelihood or no chance of survival. And of course, the desperation of supply chains that were already broken. I've walked those supply chains, and many of you know, because many of you have worked with me on the issues of the UN Business and Human Rights due diligence principles, the UN Treaty, and of course many companies are trying to work with unions in partnership to take the risk analysis, to put in place grievance for remedy and to monitor those supply chains. But we have a long way to go. So those supply chains, many of them dehumanising exploitation, and the fight that business has again lent support for eliminating areas of modern slavery, including the great victory just recently of ending the kafala system in Qatar. So we have a lot to be proud of, but we've had a lot of differences as well. And some of those differences have led to a situation that doesn't work for workers or for the global economy, at least the real economy. And that's a collapsing labour market. 40% of workers in the formal sector only, and about 30% of those in very precarious work. And then 60% in the informal sector. And of course, that's not just in developing countries. That is about, also our new and emerging forms of business, particularly internet-mediated business. Now, we can change that. We talk about a demand for a new social contract, which will be based on recovery and resilience, because without resilience, neither business or workers can actually stand against future global shocks. So we are again joined at the hip. But what does this mean for us? It means implementation of a floor of rights and security under all workers, irrespective of the employment relationship. We can fight some of those battles out in courts, but together we can say for our children, our grandchildren, as a formal basis of demand, we need certain things. And they were laid out in the ILO Centenary Declaration last year. Hard fought for, but indeed the centrepiece is a floor of commitments for all workers. They go to, we call it a labour protection floor. Indeed, it goes to fundamental rights, the right to be free, freedom of association at the heart of democracy, the right to bargain collectively, to be free of discrimination, and that includes child or forced labour or gender discrimination or racial discrimination in our world of work. It also means occupational health and safety should become a fundamental right. And I think you understand that the risk of not having health and safety has not only undermined all the safety for those frontline workers who who risked their lives, gave up their freedoms to keep us safe during many of the lockdown periods and still, but also the contamination risk of workplaces where we don't have the proper commitments in place. So we want to see OC health and safety in place. It's a fair competition floor for you, but it's also a protection for workers and a risk to shutdowns again in the global economy and particularly in our supply chains. So if you add to that universal social protection, and some of you took place in the discussion we had yesterday for indeed the concept of a global social protection fund for the most vulnerable. The Prime Minister just gave us a sense of that, but the poorest countries have no social protection. In fact, more than 55% of the world's people have no social protection. 75% have very, very tiny amounts, totally inadequate. And that's, again, not a firm basis to build basic economy. So we are committed to this together. I couldn't leave the stage without thanking the ICC for our partnerships on debt relief, on the way in which we approach debt. From our perspective, we have a lot of capital, about 40 trillion of workers' pension funds invested in the global economy. We want to see that with patient investment, medium to long term, and patient debt. The EU's opened the door to that, but we need to talk about that more. And of course, our commitment to the vaccine distribution, you know, the absolute global coherence and cooperation around getting vaccines first to the most vulnerable. We also work together on the Global Compact. And can I say to you, we need to see human rights, labour rights, those environmental standards, and indeed the anti-corruption measures, so vital for both partners to actually be supported by due diligence and a commitment to not just do the risk analysis, but to transparency and accountability. And we want to be on the team with you there. For us, it's all about trust. The breakdown in trust in our democracy is not lost on you. That's not conducive for freedom, democratic rights and freedoms, nor is it conducive for sustainable business. We have to deal with the world that people expect. We have to deal with a fair competition floor for business, which we think that provides, and we have to deal with the climate emergency, even as we look to recover and resilience. So let's climate and employment proof our future together. Thank you.